All right. Hello, everybody. Already got someone on saying hello. How's it going there? Hello. We got Angelis Perez. Good to see you on here tonight. Well, y'all, welcome. This is Spencer Keck, and I am the Hillbilly Think Tank. I'm the educated hillbilly. No, that's not an oxymoron. Don't call me a moron. There have been educated, erudite, and emancipated hillbillies in Kentucky ever since my family came through the Cumberland Gap with Daniel Boone, long time ago. And y'all, we know that here in Hardin County, where I'm running for magistrate in District 3, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is what it's all about. And if we don't have government of the people, by the people, and for the people, then we can't have life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So right now, y'all, if you didn't know, the administration, Department of Justice, is trying to take us backwards in time, back to when the Hoover FBI liked to do wiretaps on all the politicians and community organizers, folks like Martin Luther King, even presidents, anybody that he wanted to have the goods on, he would do wiretaps and surveil. Heck, he even paid the photographer that followed Martin Luther King around in Memphis, paid that guy to be an informant for the FBI. So the FBI has a very mixed history when it comes to helping us with our civil liberties and fighting against our civil liberties. But they had been, over the last, 30, 40 years, been actually turning the tide, becoming a very equitable place to work for anyone, no matter who you were and are. But, the folks that don't like any talk of including everyone at the table for dinner, they don't like that. They're doing their best to fight that. But this isn't the first time in our history that this has occurred. So we know that after the Civil War, here in Hardin County, there is a problem with the Ku Klux Klan having an uprising in the early 1870s. And so, what do? Well, it was Reconstruction. There were U.S. troops, had stations around the state, ready to help maintain the 13th and 14th Amendment and the powers that they represented, the freedoms that they represented, no matter how much the Ku Klux Klan didn't like it. So today I went out and I visited the spot that was central to this in Hardin County. This was a very big deal in our history. And someone came here that, we all know the name, but did you know that this guy was here before he died elsewhere in infamy? Hey, y'all. So this is not the first time that those in America that hate American liberty and justice have risen up and, try to strike fear in marginalized communities. So during the 1870s, racial violence was so prevalent in Kentucky that the federal government sent troops to state posts and stations in Frankfort and Elizabethtown. So here in Elizabethtown is where we are now. In the 1870s, a brash young U.S. Army general and a Civil War cavalry officer, famous for being wildly reckless in battle, was sent to Elizabethtown, Kentucky to put down the KKK that had been terrorizing the recently freed slaves in Hardin County and the rest of the state. Now, so here's where he stayed. He was at the Brown. You can see here it talks about it. Here we are, Brown Pusey House. And we're going to walk down to the square. We're going to walk down to the square and look down there where we got another sign. So this was the area that he would have been in. So when he was here in Hardin County, he brought his wife, Elizabeth, with him. All right. So he was working to free this area from the Ku Klux Klan because it had been terrorizing, like I said, those recently freed slaves. He brought his wife, Elizabeth, and from 1871 to 1873, during Reconstruction, he was tasked with suppressing the Ku Klux Klan. And again, Custer lived here in the Brown Pusey House, one of the famous spots here in Elizabethtown. And he spent time in this area and all about hunting, acquiring fine horses, buying and using hunting dogs, maintaining a very lively social life. He even had so many horses and fine hunting dogs that he pictures himself being a very vain man, as being worthy of extreme admiration of all of us here in Kentucky. Well, his wife was not as fond of Hardin County. She once was known to have said that living in this part of Kentucky, that was very poor. She went on to say that the people were low and uneducated, that 3 or 4 rode the same horse. She even said the most active inhabitants here in Hardin County was a pig. Oh my gosh. Now her assessment of Hardin County reminds me of being stationed in Sicily and seeing a man ride a scooter with his wife on board. And behind him, the wife was cradling a baby in her arms. Their grocery bags were somehow lashed to the back of the Vespa scooter, and a small dog was riding right there into the man's feet on the floorboard of the scooter. right, and all along, they were rocketing around town without a helmet. Now, I actually admire the spunk and veritable freedom of the poor and those that won't be held down by their circumstances. But of course, it's all in your perspective. Anyway, the U.S. Cavalry and a company of the 4th U.S. Infantry arrived in Hardin County in the spring of 1871 to limit the activities of the Ku Klux Klan and other regulated groups. The presence of the federal troops likely had a positive effect on quieting racial disturbances in the area, as little was reported in the 2 years that Custer and his men were stationed here. And this is also more than likely was probably when Reverend Allen Allensworth was preaching at the First Black Baptist Church located in 112 West Poplar Street near the town square, and the site of my previous videos on Colonel Allen Allensworth. So we're going to look across the square here. It's right now they're doing construction, but there was, and I assume there is still a historical marker over there talking about Custer coming here and being stationed here. But unfortunately, right now, we can't access that area because they're doing work on the courthouse. They're remodeling it, making it a bed and breakfast. But again, y'all, this is part of my district, District 3. A little section of it is here. And yeah, we'll talk more about all this. All right, y'all. So again, this isn't exactly anything new in our history, but it is something that we have to push back against. We can't allow this absolute craziness to come back. So, you might remember being told that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness was a right that's given to us all by the highest power in the universe. Well, I have based my whole life on this premise. And I am not about to go back and look for the days where we can segregate water fountains again, segregate schools again, and forget the contributions that people like Colonel Allen Allensworth of Kentucky made to our great nation. I'm not going to forget the contributions that General Young of Kentucky made to our history, to our nation. Made great gains with General Young. We made great gains in inventions and amazing knowledge with what Garrett Morgan did for us. He's also of Kentucky. He had to leave the state in order to get an education and to make something of himself after 7th grade. But that's another story that I've talked about before. But, it is time for us to get back to this life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, making sure that that's the main thing that our politicians and should be our community servants base everything they do upon that. Now, sadly, there's been for a long time a cabal of men that believe their wealth makes their life more important and noble than the workers in this world. They feel free to trample on the rights of those with very little wealth. And, this Epstein class loves to stomp on the downtrodden. So there have been folks willing to fight back against those who hate freedom and justice, for all. One of those groups is the Southern Poverty Law Center. When the KKK spent years terrorizing minorities in Alabama, Mississippi, and anywhere in the nation that freedom and justice was under attack, the Southern Poverty Law Center has been created and put into effect to enforce the fight for those terrorized by those that hate liberty and justice for all. So now the Southern Poverty Law Center is under attack because the Southern Poverty Law Center, back when Hoover was the head of the FBI, and Hoover really didn't care much at all about civil rights for those that are downtrodden, the Southern Poverty Law Center started gathering funds to basically find informants in the KKK and other hate groups and paying them to give information to the Southern Poverty Law Center that then the Southern Poverty Law Center would give to the police, to the FBI, primarily to the FBI, since, of course, the police in many places in the South was the same one fire hosing children and adults that were peacefully protesting. So the Southern Poverty Law Center was very capable in aiding the FBI and doing what the FBI should have been doing by itself to begin with. For years, they had this relationship with the FBI and the Department of Justice where they would help root out racist groups that don't like us all to have our kumbaya moments. They can't stand to see us sitting in church together or in school together, praying together, learning together. You know, that's just not what they believe in. So, for years, they have hated the fact that the Southern Poverty Law Center was actually one of the groups that when I was in the military and they asked me to be an equal opportunity officer, we used material that the Southern Poverty Law Center provided for us to recognize the signs of racist gangs in our midst in the military. So, you know, the right wing, the Reich wing, the very far Reich wing, the Epstein wing of our society has wanted to wipe out the Southern Poverty Law Center for a long time. They've had a beef with them because they would not stand up to allow racism to run amok and terrorize the downtrodden, whether it's poor Blacks, poor Hispanics, poor white folks. They've worked to push back against the Epstein class, the same class of people that owned slaves, traded slaves, had sex with their slaves, had sex with their slaves' children. And then when that ended, after the Civil War and after the Reconstruction ended and the troops moved out of the South, they are the same ones that started Jim Crow laws, started the segregation laws, started the war wasn't about slavery, even though every single Southern state that seceded from the Union said it was about slavery in their Constitution. But that's another thing. But they have not been happy that they cannot have their unfettered power over normal people, whether Black, white, or any other minority, or just, you know, poor working people of any race or color. The Epstein class doesn't want them to, you know, us to unite. So they've tried to bring down the Southern Poverty Law Center for years, and they've been close to successful. Right now, they're really coming the closest they've ever been to trying to destroy this pillar of our community that helps educate and helps us to realize that, you know, we're not all enemies. We're in this together. We're in this to give justice, as their name implies, to every single one of us that works hard for a living, pays our taxes, and then watches people like the Epstein class get away with literal murder and child rape. So, if we have forgotten, let's just get a little background on what it is that the Southern Poverty Law Center has done for us, for all of us.
The Southern Poverty Law Center is vowing to vigorously fight an indictment leveled against the civil rights organization by the Department of Justice. FBI Director Kash Patel joined Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche earlier in the week, claiming that a DOJ investigation found that the SPLC used donor money to pay informants in extremist groups like the Ku Klux Klan and the National Socialist Movement, and then hid the payments through shell companies. The 11-count indictment was handed down by a federal grand jury in Alabama, where the Southern Poverty Law Center is located. The organization's interim CEO and president said he is, quote, outraged by the false accusations. Joining us now, the president and CEO of the National Urban League, Mark Morial, and former U.S. attorney and MS Now legal analyst, Joyce Vance. Our thanks to you both for being with us.
Thank
Joyce,
you.
I'll start with you. Can you just walk us through this indictment? What allegations are made, and in your estimation, do they have merit?
Well, this, Jonathan, is something we've discussed before. It's a speaking indictment. So instead of just being bare bones, the Justice Department lays out its entire theory of the case. They then charge the Southern Poverty Law Center. They only charge the entity. They don't charge any individuals with wire fraud, with making false statements to banks, and to money laundering. The money laundering charge first. That depends entirely on whether there's any merit to the other two substantive charges. If they don't work out for the government, then money laundering is off the table. And so it's interesting. I think the easiest way to summarize the merits of this indictment is to say that it's hyper-focused on one aspect of how the Southern Poverty Law Center operated, that for a period of time they paid informants, they paid them a lot of money to provide information about various domestic terror, white supremacist hate groups. And this is not unused or...
Again, don't forget, we're talking about a domestic terror group, a group that bombed the houses of Black folks, a group that bombed the churches of Black folks, the KKK, groups that bombed and terrorized folks continuously, enraged that after years of Black folks, folks serving in the military from the Civil War, heck, even the Revolutionary War, but especially the Civil War, to the American Indian War on the plain after the Civil War out west, the Buffalo Soldiers, they're the ones who opened up the West. They're the ones who manned the forts, built the infrastructure out west. They're the first rangers, park rangers in national parks. When the first national park was created, it was Buffalo Soldiers used. Look at Yosemite. General Young, I just mentioned, that was one of his duty assignments. So, African Americans kept serving every single war we've been in. They served in the Spanish-American War, as I showed the other night. They were actually the first ones up San Juan Hill, ahead of Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders. If it hadn't been for the Buffalo Soldiers, the African American soldiers in the Spanish-American War, taking that hill ahead of Roosevelt, Roosevelt never would have got his Medal of Honor. He would have been wiped out. But they came home from that war, still to find institutional racism everywhere. Next war, not long after, World War I. They served honorably in World War I in segregated units. Came home, horrible racism. Black Wall Street burned to the ground. Look at so many different places all over the South where there were Black communities. They were terrified and terrorized even worse after these soldiers came home victorious with the rest of the American soldiers, and yet their communities were terrorized and destroyed. Next, we had World War II. And what followed? Again, African American soldiers in segregated units in the Army, Navy, served honorably, served with distinction even. And yet they found out when they came home, it still didn't matter. Schools were still segregated for their kids, and when they wanted to come home and use this new thing called the GI Bill, well, they weren't allowed to because schools were segregated. When they came home and wanted to use this new thing called Veterans Administration loans, which I've used to buy my house a few times, they found out that, oh, hey, and the segregated communities they went to go buy houses in, they were blacklisted from getting insurance for their mortgage. So they couldn't get a mortgage. So here they were, serving honorably, and yet going home to find the exact same racism that they thought they conquered as they were fighting for freedom worldwide, fighting for democracy worldwide. So they decided at the end of the war that enough was enough. And they were going to do something about it. So, we'd had Black Wall Street, like I said, burned to the ground. That was a very successful part of Oklahoma, just burnt to the ground, forgotten, erased. But they would not forget. So World War II comes. When white veterans return from the war, they get to use their GI Bill to go to college for free. Once they get those college degrees, all of a sudden, the white veterans are finding better jobs, higher paying jobs. They buy their homes with the VA loan, no money down. And we have a boom in America of building houses. We start having the suburban sprawl. And what follows? Every single white veteran, their family now, they get to use that home that dad and grandpa bought and take out a second mortgage on it to pay for college for their kids. So then now white kids are getting to go to college due to the service of their grandfather or their dad. And is that happening in the Black communities? Is that creating generational wealth in their communities? No. So by the time the 50s come to pass, we have Brown versus the Board of Education, and we start having extreme terror from the KKK, who sees that, times they were changing. So then what do? Well, again, like I said, they start bombing. They start creating untold, up to that time, terror. And it happened, but now it's getting even worse. The lynchings are getting worse. So something had to give. And that's when the Southern Poverty Law Center started doing their own investigations, since the FBI wasn't doing nearly enough and almost nothing to fight back against the KKK. So this is what they're upset about, because after events like this, the Southern Poverty Law Center was highly effective in bringing down the groups that committed those atrocities, the KKK being one of the chief among them, but there are others. So when we hear that, oh, now the Department of Justice is going to sue the Southern Poverty Law Center for using their members' donated money to infiltrate the KKK and bring the KKK and groups like it to their knees, yeah, I'm not going to be bamboozled into thinking that the Department of Justice is working on the side of justice right now, because it's had a period, like I said, under the Hoover administration, of doing just the opposite, of spying on civil rights leaders, on spying on every single president that existed under Hoover. So, yes, they've done some great things, the FBI, but they are controlled by politicians, sadly. They're not anymore, under this regime, independent of politics, as they previously had become, finally. So it's time to really recognize a bamboozling when it's going on. So let's go back to this talk about the DOJ indicting the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Or unused in federal law enforcement either. If you want to get information about a domestic terror group, you have to go and talk to domestic terrorists. Oftentimes, those are unscrupulous people, and your best way in is to pay them. So what this indictment does is it sort of uses the fiction that the only thing that the Southern Poverty Law Center was doing was paying informants, and it ignores the center's larger work, which involved dismantling those entities. They were the entity that was responsible for bankrupting the Ku Klux Klan and putting them out of business. As domestic terror groups reformed in that vacuum, they then began scrutinizing them, often working with law enforcement to provide information. You know, the point here is that this might be an indictment that looks good on its face in some ways, but it doesn't hold up to scrutiny. And a jury, of course, will hear the evidence in this larger context. Tough sell for prosecutors to convict.
Mark, when you look at how this has now been used politically on the internet, on the cover of the New York Post today, the argument is that this money has funded, this is the money that was responsible for the Unite the Right rally, for Charlottesville, that the KKK actually, per the cover of the Post, funded by the SPLC. And so for you and the question of paid informants, how do you process the conversation that's happening as a result?
The indictment is nakedly political, and it's the Justice Department turning on itself. For years, federal law enforcement worked with the Southern Poverty Law Center to ferret out hate groups and domestic terrorist groups. And recently, the Justice Department canceled its relationship with the Southern Poverty Law Center. So the government has been intimately involved in what the Southern Poverty Law Center has done, which has been an important public service, and that is to ferret out these hate groups, these domestic terrorist groups, these anti-Semitic groups. And this Justice Department, once again, is furthering this pattern and practice of an assault on civil rights through frivolous, politically motivated indictments. Think of Comey, think of the Attorney General in New York. Think of these. This is a continuation, indeed, of that pattern. And to stand up against this is really the call to action for the American people, because the Justice Department itself in recent years has identified these types of groups as the biggest threat to the public safety, to mass violence in this country, these supremacist groups, these domestic terrorist groups. So the Southern Poverty Law Center has performed an important public service, consistently and continuously working with our government to ferret out these groups. So this indictment, I think, is political. I think it's a grasping at straws. And let's see how it evolves in the courts.
So it's absolutely political, and it's absolutely politicizing the Justice Department. So we know that right now they have fired and let go of so many great career investigators in the FBI that they're doing just what ICE did and now trying to scramble to hire people, and they're actually lowering their qualification standards. So it's a joke, complete, absolute joke. And it's extremely sad because, we went from the Hoover administration, where, yes, the FBI started learning how to investigate using things like fingerprints and forensics, but they ignored helping minorities for a long time and actually were part of the problem, to actually becoming an entity that was all about equity and really solving serious crime and keeping us protected from terrorism, both primarily domestic, but even recognizing we had international external terrorism organizations on our shores. Now it's been weakened to where we can't even recognize that or do anything about it. And here, a group that has been helping fight domestic terrorism, they're now trying to punish them for actually standing up for justice. So what are we going to do about it? What can we do about it? That's the question that we've got to ask ourselves. If you don't remember Mississippi burning, tell a very similar story to what happened in Birmingham. But as my friend from Birmingham said, Birmingham was called Bombingham. It was far worse even than Mississippi burning. But, there was a very good Hollywood version of this and what happened with Gene Hackman.
How much trouble you've caused. They've been on the radio all day. Everyone from Townley to the governor talking about FBI intimidation. We're not thugs, Mr. Anderson. We're going to do this thing my way.
I know, Bureau procedure.
And what the hell were you doing at the beauty parlor? If that was Bureau business, I want to know about it. If it wasn't, I won't allow it. Do you understand me?
Get in here. You know what your problem is? You don't know when to speak and when to shut up. That makes you a fool. Mrs. Pell ain't going to say anything to me. Her husband doesn't want her to say. And I'm not going to choke it out.
This can of worms only opens from the inside.
I know that.
Do you know how much trouble?
So this can of worms only opens from the inside. And the Southern Poverty Law Center was an integral part of opening up that horror from the inside out and exposing it. And to try and now act like the Southern Poverty Law Center is anything but patriotic is astounding. It's appalling. It's something we should all push back against. We've come so far, and so much has changed since the bombing of that church. And yet we've got folks who want to take us back. Roll back the clock. Act like it never happened. Act like things were always good and always well. But we know better. We're not going to let that happen. So I say here in all of our communities around the nation, we band together. We make sure, hey, if we're going to church, our church should look like heaven. It shouldn't look like segregation. We shouldn't want it to. If we're going to school, it should look like America really is the greatest melting pot in the world. We should stand up for the fact that that's how I have been involved in 2 wars that we won. The first Gulf War and Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. We got rid of the terrorists in Afghanistan by not segregated units, but integrated units, where we all were one team, one fight. And that's America. That's the best of all of us. When we all are together and we all are recognized as having a place at the table and a part in this great experiment called democracy. Without each and every one of us being able to sing our song loud and clear and sing our freedom chants, we're nothing. We're a divided mess. And hey, Kentucky, we know united we stand, divided we fall. And this Department of Justice should not be able to divide us. It shouldn't be, as Tom is saying here, the Department of just us, meaning the Epstein class against us. They don't want justice. They are not intent on liberty and justice for all. They're intent on raking in everything they can, pushing us away, and pedophilia, and getting away with it. That's their game. It has been since slavery, has been during Jim Crow, and we can't bring that back. Now that it's been exposed, we've all got to stand up and say, okay, we've got elections coming up. We've got right now in May the chance to go decide who will be on our ballots in November. That's extremely important election. We've got to put fighters on the ballot who will stand against the Epstein class and who will bring us back to what we should be. And we know that the guardians of the pedophile have not been doing that for us. They've only been protecting tax breaks for the wealthy and keeping folks that were on Epstein Island out of jail and giving them all the government contracts they want. Musk, Microsoft, the Amazon crowd. So it's time. All right, y'all. Let's remember to like and subscribe if you would. Also, vote. And again, I'm running for Magistrate District 3. Vote for me because I am for a Hardin County that's for all of us. I'm for a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, so that we have this life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that we are talking about being so important. And we can't have anyone stand in the way of that. So remember, everyone deployed overseas tonight. Bless your corazon. We're almost to the end of the week. It's Friday Eve. Thank goodness. Friday Eve is finally here.
He grew them because when the bank foreclosed on farms across the